Most people spend their entire lives trying to control their thoughts. They try to think more positively. They try to stop overthinking. They try to silence fear, doubt, insecurity, anxiety. But what you have to understand is this. The problem is not that you have negative thoughts. The problem is that you believe those thoughts are you. And once you identify with every thought that passes through your mind, you lose the ability to see clearly. Think about it. If one fearful thought can change your entire emotional state, if one memory can completely shift your mood, if one imagined scenario can make your body react as if it were real, then your mind is not simply describing reality. It is generating internal experiences that you unconsciously accept as truth. Most people never realize this. They think their thoughts are accurate because the thoughts feel personal. But feeling personal does not make them true. That is where suffering quietly begins. Because once you believe every thought represents who you are, you start building your identity around mental noise. You begin saying things like, "I'm anxious. I'm lost. I'm not enough. I always fail. I can't change." But look carefully at what is actually happening. A thought appears. You emotionally attach to it. Then you repeat it until it feels like identity. Now stay with me here. There is a difference between having a thought and becoming the thought. That difference changes everything. A cloud passes through the sky, but the sky remains untouched. Your thoughts move the same way. They appear, they disappear, they shift constantly. Yet most people spend years trying to fight clouds instead of realizing they are the sky itself. The truth is, your mind produces thoughts continuously. That is what minds do. Some thoughts are useful. Some are distorted. Some come from fear. Some come from old emotional wounds. Some were absorbed from childhood. Some were repeated so often that they became automatic. But automatic does not mean true. Let that sink in. Many of the thoughts you call your personality are simply repeated mental patterns, conditioning, emotional memory, old interpretations. You were not born believing you were unworthy. You learned it. You absorbed it. You repeated it. And repetition creates familiarity. Then familiarity starts feeling like identity. This is why people remain trapped in cycles they consciously want to escape. A person may want abundance while internally repeating thoughts of scarcity. A person may desire love while carrying thoughts of rejection. A person may pursue peace while mentally rehearsing fear every day. Their external goals move in one direction while their inner conditioning pulls them in another, and eventually they become exhausted. Not because change is impossible, but because they are trying to create a new life while remaining identified with an old mental structure. This is where everything begins to shift. The moment you realize you are not your thoughts, space appears inside you. Awareness appears, and awareness changes your relationship with the mind. Instead of drowning inside every thought, you begin observing them. You notice how certain thoughts repeat themselves. You notice how fear predicts the future. You notice how insecurity searches for proof. You notice how the mind constantly tries to protect you from pain by imagining worst-case scenarios. But protection and truth are not the same thing. The mind often confuses familiarity with safety. Even painful patterns can feel safe simply because they are known. This is why people unconsciously return to emotional states that hurt them, not because they enjoy suffering. Because the subconscious mind prefers what is familiar over what is unfamiliar, even when the familiar creates pain. Think about someone who constantly expects disappointment. At first, it seems like realism, but over time it becomes a mental habit. Their mind scans reality looking for confirmation. And because attention shapes perception, they keep noticing experiences that reinforce the same belief. Then they say, "See, this always happens to me." But they are not seeing reality clearly. They are seeing reality through conditioning. Most people do this without realizing it. They mistake mental repetition for objective truth. And the longer this continues, the more disconnected they become from their actual power. Because when you believe every thought automatically deserves your trust, you surrender your inner authority. You become reactive. You live emotionally controlled by mental activity you never consciously examined. That is why inner awareness matters. Not as philosophy, not as spirituality alone, as practical freedom. Because once you observe your thoughts, instead of merging with them, something remarkable happens. You stop reacting to every mental movement. You stop feeding every fearful story. You stop assuming every emotion defines you permanently. And slowly, your inner state becomes calmer. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, because you are no longer fighting yourself all day. Many people believe peace comes from controlling external circumstances. More money, more validation, more certainty, more control. But even after achieving those things, the mind often creates new fears. That is why external success alone never creates lasting peace. If the mind remains chaotic, the external world cannot fully compensate for it. This is why some people appear successful, yet feel internally empty. Their identity is still tied to unstable mental patterns. Now understand this carefully. Real inner transformation does not begin when you force positive thinking. It begins when you stop unconsciously believing every negative thought. There is a difference. Forcing positivity often creates suppression. Awareness creates separation. And separation creates clarity. Imagine sitting beside a river. Leaves float across the water continuously. You see them appear, move, disappear. You do not chase every leaf. You do not panic because one dark leaf passes by. Thoughts work the same way. But most people jump into the river and get carried away by every mental story. One thought about failure becomes an entire identity. One memory becomes permanent self-definition. One fear becomes a prediction about life itself. And after years of repeating these patterns, they forget they were ever separate from the mind. This is why presence matters so deeply. Presence interrupts unconscious identification. When you become fully aware of the present moment, thought loses part of its control over you. You begin noticing silence between thoughts. You begin noticing that awareness itself remains stable even while emotions fluctuate. That awareness is closer to your real nature than the constant noise in your head. The mind changes constantly. Your deeper awareness does not. And once you begin experiencing that directly, something inside you relaxes. You stop trying to fix yourself every second. You stop treating every emotional reaction as proof that something is wrong with you. You understand that healing is not becoming thoughtless. It is learning not to become imprisoned by thought. That changes the way you move through life. You become less reactive, less emotionally manipulated by temporary states, less controlled by fear-based mental loops. And slowly, you start making decisions from clarity instead of emotional survival. Most people never experience this because they spend their lives trying to improve the mind without first understanding the mind. They decorate the prison instead of questioning the prison itself. Now, this does not mean thoughts are useless. Thought is an incredible tool. It helps you create, plan, communicate, solve problems. But a tool becomes dangerous when it unconsciously becomes your identity. You were never meant to live trapped inside compulsive mental activity. You were meant to use the mind consciously. That is very different. And once you realize this, your relationship with yourself begins to change. You become more patient with yourself, more aware of emotional patterns, more intentional with attention. You stop asking, "How do I eliminate negative thoughts?" And you start asking, "Why am I identifying with every thought I experience?" That question opens a completely different door. Because freedom is not the absence of thought. Freedom is the ability to remain centered while thoughts come and go. That is real emotional strength, not emotional suppression, not pretending to feel good all the time. Awareness, presence, conscious observation. The truth is, Most suffering is amplified by unconscious identification. A painful thought appears, then the mind repeats it, then emotion strengthens it, then repetition turns it into identity. And eventually the person says, "This is just who I am." But it was never who they were. It was conditioning repeated long enough to feel permanent. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You have simply spent years believing every thought deserved your trust. But now you can begin seeing differently. You can begin observing instead of absorbing. And the moment you stop defining yourself by every mental movement, your entire inner world begins to open. You feel more space, more clarity, more emotional freedom. Not because life stopped being difficult, because you finally stopped turning every passing thought into your identity. Let that sink in. You are the awareness observing the thought, not the thought itself. And once you truly realize that, the mind no longer controls you in the same way. It still speaks. But now you can choose whether to follow it. If this way of thinking helped you see yourself differently, subscribe to the channel and continue exploring these ideas with us. There is another video waiting for you that will help you understand how subconscious patterns silently shape your reality every single day.